Imagine a man who believes he can think his way out of every problem. He sits alone, surrounded by books and notes, reasoning furiously. Every feeling, every impulse is quickly labeled, classified, analyzed, rationalized. Yet no matter how much he reasons, the same question haunts him. Who am I? And worse, why do I feel so torn, so fragmented, when reason insists I should be whole? This is the paradox of rationality. The very tool that promises clarity becomes the prison that blinds. For centuries, philosophy has crowned reason as the noblest human faculty. Socrates proclaimed, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Descartes asserted, "Cogito ergo sum." I think, therefore I am. And yet, behind this crown of light, there lurks a shadow. The limits of reason, the blind spots, the fractures that logic cannot mend. Rationality is not a pure light. It casts shadows. It reveals truths, but also creates illusions. Our minds build walls of certainty only to discover they enclose contradictions. The mind demands coherence, but finds chaos. Dostoevsky knew this well. His characters often suffer from hyper-rationality, the attempt to force life into neat categories, only to be destroyed by the messiness they deny. In Notes from Underground, the underground man confesses his torment. "I swear to you, gentlemen, that to be overly conscious is a sickness, a real, thorough sickness. The tragedy is this. Reason wants to unify the self, but the self is fractured by passions, desires, fears, irrational forces that reason cannot command. You try to master your emotions with logic, but logic alone cannot soothe the restless depths." Modern psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, the tension between beliefs, feelings, and behavior. Your mind holds two opposing ideas simultaneously, and instead of peace, you feel inner turmoil. You argue with yourself, convince yourself, deny, rationalize. You become a prisoner of your own thoughts, locked in endless mental debate. Rationality turns from liberator to jailer. Philosophers have long wrestled with reason's dual nature. Immanuel Kant taught that reason sets the conditions for experience, but cannot know the thing in itself, the ultimate reality behind appearances. David Hume showed that reason is the slave of the passions. Logic alone cannot determine what we value or desire. This is the great paradox. Reason is powerful, but it is incomplete. You cannot think your way to truth without feeling your way as well. In Vedanta, the mind is called manas, a restless instrument of thought. But beyond manas lies buddhi, pure discriminative intelligence, the power to see clearly without attachment. And beyond buddhi lies atman, the true self, beyond all thought and feeling. The spiritual path does not reject reason. It transcends it. It says, reason is a tool. It is not you. Carl Jung called the parts of ourselves we deny the shadow. Our rational ego fears the shadow because it is irrational. Emotions, instincts, unconscious drives. But the shadow is not enemy. It is part of wholeness. The problem arises when reason denies the shadow, insisting on neatness and control. This denial causes the inner split, the contradiction we must face. And in that split, a quiet voice begins to ask what reason cannot answer. If I just think harder, I will understand myself. If I just control my impulses, I will be free. But why then do I feel trapped? Why does my mind circle in endless loops? You realize the problem is not the mind itself, but your identification with it. You have mistaken the mirror for the self. The journey begins when you stop fighting the contradiction. You admit, I don't know who I am. I am torn. I am fragmented. This admission is terrifying, but it is also liberating. For the first time, you no longer pretend you have all the answers. You open to the possibility of mystery, to the space where reason and emotion meet. Tonight, take a moment to sit quietly. Ask yourself, what is one belief I hold about myself that no longer serves me? Don't seek an answer. Just hold the question. Feel the tension of not knowing. This is the first step out of the rational prison. Reason has been your sword and shield, but it is not the whole story. You stand now at the edge of reason, where doubt grows, where contradictions refuse to be solved. It is here that true self-knowledge begins. You are a contradiction. You desire freedom, but also structure. You long to belong, but also to stand apart. You crave truth, but secretly hope it doesn't destroy your illusions. You are a conscious animal, torn between the pull of instinct and the weight of reason, between your higher ideals and your base desires. And perhaps the cruelest twist of all, you are aware of this contradiction. That awareness does not liberate you, it torments you. You think, if I know what's right, why can't I do it? If I want peace, why do I sabotage it? If I am one self, why do I feel like many? Dostoevsky gives voice to this fractured psyche through his underground man, who, even in the act of confessing, resists clarity. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I think my liver is diseased. But he's not really talking about illness. He's talking about the inward war. He hates his reason because it exposes his pettiness, yet he clings to it because it's the only thing that feels real. He desires greatness, but acts small. He despises mediocrity, yet wallows in it. He wants to rebel against the deterministic 2x2 equals 4 of the modern rational world, and instead cling to the irrational act, simply to prove that he can. This is the Dostoevskian contradiction. The human being is not a problem to be solved, but a tension to be suffered consciously. Modern psychology calls this state ambivalence, a push-pull, a yes and no, a constant oscillation. You want intimacy, but fear vulnerability. You crave solitude, then panic at your own silence. You build an identity only to tear it down in a crisis. This is not mental illness, it is a feature of being human. As philosopher and psychologist Rollo May once wrote, "The healthy personality is not one without conflict, but one who can bear the weight of contradiction." In Vedantic teaching, this contradiction arises from avidya, ignorance of the true self. You mistake the ego mind, this flickering bundle of thoughts, preferences, memories, for who you are. But the ego is inherently contradictory. It is shaped by circumstance, desire, and fear. It wants what the world wants, and it wants to control what it cannot. The real self, the Atman, does not contradict. It witnesses contradiction. It is the silent awareness that watches you think, feel, act, regret, repeat. To step back into that witnessing space is the beginning of wholeness. But the ego resists this. It wants its contradiction. Why? Because contradiction gives it drama, and drama makes the ego feel alive. Jung warned, what you resist persists, what you accept transforms. The goal is not to eradicate contradiction, it is to integrate it. You are not a single self. You are a multiplicity, a parliament of voices, each with its own need, fear, wound. There is the child who wants to be held, the rebel who wants to burn everything down, the ascetic who seeks meaning, the hedonist who wants pleasure without guilt. To be whole, you must let them speak. Not obey all of them, but hear them. Neither repress nor romanticize. You do not solve contradiction by silencing it, but by hosting it with dignity. The Sufis say the human heart is like a shattered mirror. Each shard reflects a different piece of the beloved. Your contradictions are fragments of your longing. Your pride masks your fear. Your lust conceals your hunger for union. Your rage hides your grief. The Sufi path is not about becoming consistent, but becoming transparent, so the light can pass through every fragment. Here is the paradox at the root of all self-transformation. You must fight your lower nature like a warrior, but also surrender like a monk. You must act, knowing it may not work. You must love, knowing you may be rejected. You must speak, knowing you will be misunderstood. This is the mature contradiction, to walk the razor's edge between effort and surrender, power and vulnerability, knowing and not knowing. I want peace. Then why do you create conflict? I want truth. Then why do you lie to yourself? I want to be whole. Then why do you divide yourself with shame and pride? You begin to see, it is not that you are broken, it is that you are divided. And perhaps that division was never your fault. but healing is your responsibility. In evolutionary psychology, contradiction is not dysfunction. It is adaptive complexity. If you were a one-dimensional being, you would not survive. Your very ability to hold conflicting instincts, to delay gratification, to weigh competing needs, to tolerate paradox, is your intelligence. The pain you feel in contradiction is the birthplace of insight. Only in tension can muscles grow. Only in paradox can consciousness evolve. Take a page and divide it in two. On the left, write what I believe. On the right, how I behave. Do not judge, just notice the contradictions. Now below it, write, what am I not seeing? Let this question remain open, unanswered. This is not self-judgment. This is sacred inquiry. You are not here to resolve contradiction. You are here to contain it, to live in the fire without running, to walk in shadow without denying the light. This is not clarity in the modern sense. It is a deeper clarity, born of humility. The clarity that says, I do not know, but I am willing to see. And that is the beginning of integration. At some point, contradiction becomes unbearable. Not because it intensifies, but because you begin to see how much of your life has been a performance held together by fear, not truth. The tension between your masks and your marrow, between who you are and who you pretend to be, starts to tear at the seams. And something in you collapses. Not dramatically, not with fireworks, but quietly, like an old building giving way to time. It is the beginning of the inner funeral. A part of you must die. In The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky writes, "What is hell? I maintain that it is the suffering of being unable to love. But that suffering is not just emotional, it's existential. You are torn between your longing for the infinite and your petty, compulsive clinging to the finite. You sabotage the very thing you crave, because to receive love means becoming vulnerable, and vulnerability is the death of ego." Dostoevsky's characters do not transform through success, they transform through failure, through humiliation, collapse, contradiction, because only ruin is honest, and only in honesty can transformation begin. In trauma therapy, there's a term, deconstruction. It's the moment a person stops trying to maintain the false self. The ego defenses give way. They say things like, I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I believed feels hollow. I'm tired of performing. This is not breakdown. It is breakthrough. Painful, yes, but vital. For new selfhood to emerge, the false scaffolding must fall. Vedanta calls this moment ego death. Not the literal death of self-awareness, but the death of the imagined controller, the I that thinks it runs the show. You begin to see that your suffering is not coming from the world, but from your false identification with thoughts, roles, and desires. You believed you were the thinker. Now you see you are the witness. You thought you had free will. Now you realize you are being lived by something deeper. This insight doesn't feel liberating at first. It feels like death, because the ego resists dissolution. It fights to the end, clinging to its opinions, grudges, and insecurities. But when the fight stops, the silence behind the contradiction begins to speak. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You realize that the parts of you you've been trying to kill, your shame, rage, lust, despair, are not enemies. They are exiles, wounded children, fragments of you that were cast out to keep the mask intact. But now, as the contradiction collapses, they return, not to destroy you, but to ask, will you finally listen? In Sufi mysticism, there is a sacred state called fanaya, annihilation of the self. It is not suicide, it is surrender. The lover loses themselves in the beloved. The separate wave dissolves back into the ocean. In the poetry of Rumi, die before you die, so when death comes, you will not die. This is not metaphor, it is spiritual instruction. Die to your contradiction. Die to your need to be consistent, impressive, successful. Die to your attachments, your narratives, your blame. Only what is true will remain. Developmental psychology echoes this wisdom. Every major transition, adolescence, midlife, old age, requires a symbolic death. In midlife, the goals of the ego must die so the soul's deeper longings can emerge. This death can look like depression, crisis, even madness. But it is not disease, it is initiation, a necessary unmaking of the persona so that the deeper self can be born. You are not going crazy. You are going through. Inner dialogue, the voice of collapse. I don't know who I am anymore. Good, that means the illusion is dissolving. I feel empty. That is space being cleared for truth. I'm scared I won't survive this. You won't. Not as the one who entered this fire, but something truer will rise, if you let it. Here is the mystery. Contradiction does not go away. It goes deeper. It transforms from a chaotic split into a sacred tension, from neurosis into paradox. You begin to sense that the spiritual life is not about eliminating conflict, but sanctifying it. As the alchemist said, solve et coagula, dissolve, then bind anew. You are being dissolved, so you can be remade. In Buddhism, the path out of suffering is not to choose one side of contradiction, desire or denial, self or no self, but to see through the illusion of separation entirely. The middle way is not mediocrity, it is subtlety. You stop trying to fix life and begin to observe it. You stop trying to be good and begin to become real. The contradiction begins to feel less like a war and more like a dance. You are the dancer, but also the stillness underneath. Tonight, write a letter from your false self to your real self. Let the mask speak. Let it say everything it's afraid to lose. Power, approval, control, perfection, then burn it. Literally, watch it curl, blacken, turn to ash. And as you do, whisper, I am not this story. Let the ashes return to silence. The contradiction was never your enemy. It was your doorway. It brought you to your knees. And only there, on the floor of your own ruin, did you finally hear the still, quiet voice beneath the chaos. You are not the divided one. You are the witness of all division. You are the silence in which the contradiction trembles and dissolves. This is not the end. This is the edge of transformation. The rest is still hidden, waiting for your surrender. You begin to see something strange. The more you surrender, the more whole you become. Not because the pieces fit perfectly, but because you stop trying to make them fit at all. You no longer panic when contradictions arise. You welcome them. You speak with kindness and clarity, even when your mind trembles. You act with strength, even as your heart aches. You are no longer one thing. You are not coherent. You are true. In The Idiot, Prince Mishkin, innocent, neurotic, trembling with contradictions, is mocked by society. Yet he carries something untouchable, not naivety, but a radiant compassion forged in suffering. Dostoevsky seems to ask, what if holiness is not coherence, but the ability to love while being deeply broken? What if the human soul, in its very incoherence, is the stage on which God appears, not to solve, but to suffer with us, to witness, to hold? That is no longer philosophy, that is devotion. Vedanta ends where it began, with the self. But now you don't just know the teaching, you have become it. You have seen the contradiction come and go. Shame, longing, rage, desire, pride, grief. Yet something in you remained untouched. The one who watched. You are not the body, not the ego, not even the thinker. You are the pure awareness in which all contradictions rise and fall, like waves on the ocean. And the waves no longer scare you, because you've remembered the ocean. Modern psychology now echoes this ancient truth. The most resilient people are not the most consistent. They are the most psychologically flexible. They hold opposite truths. They feel deep sadness and still show up with courage. They feel doubt and still choose integrity. They feel anger and still respond with care. This is maturity, not the absence of contradiction, but the strength to hold it without collapsing. It is not stability, it is integration. Carl Jung named this process individuation, not perfection, not moral purity. but the wholeness that comes from embracing the entirety of yourself, the light and the shadow, the rational and the irrational, the masculine and the feminine, the sacred and the savage. The self becomes a mandala, complex, contradictory, but whole. You are no longer at war with your contradictions. You are now their home. You have become the container. In Sufism, they speak of the insan al-kamil, the complete human, not the saint without sin, but the one who has descended into the darkest night and emerged bearing both the wound and the light. As Rumi says, try to be a sheet of paper with nothing on it. Be a spot of ground where nothing is growing, where something might be planted, a seed possibly, from the absolute. You have become the soil. You no longer demand clarity. You trust the mystery. You do not resolve contradiction. You host it. In Hermetic and occult science, this is called conjunctio, the sacred marriage, the sun and the moon, the king and the queen, the conscious and the unconscious. This union creates the philosopher's stone, not a literal object, but a psychic center of balance that can no longer be shattered by opposites. You are no longer seeking to escape duality. You are learning to wield it. In you, the opposites have touched, and something eternal has been born. Something powerful happens here. You begin to speak with authority, not because you have all the answers, but because you have made peace with not having them. You no longer posture. You no longer need to dominate, prove, or preach. Your presence does the work. There is a stillness in your eyes, a humility in your tone, a gravity in your gestures, not self-righteous, but rooted. This is spiritual power, the kind that cannot be faked, the kind that cannot be taken away. So, what am I now? You are not someone else. You are finally yourself, not the performance, not the reaction, not the contradiction, but the space in which contradiction becomes sacred. Have I healed? Number. And yes, you are healing in every moment by choosing to stay open, to love what you once rejected, to walk forward with doubt still whispering in your ear. What should I do now? Live, but live as one who has died and come back. Laugh, but laugh like someone who has held darkness and still chosen light. Speak, but only from what you've lived, not what you borrowed. Let your very being become a sermon, without words. Stand before a mirror tonight. Look into your own eyes. Don't fix your posture. Don't arrange your face. Let yourself be seen, tired, uncertain, alive. Now say out loud, I do not have to resolve this contradiction to be whole. I am the contradiction. I am the space that holds both the fire and the silence. Repeat it until your voice no longer shakes. You thought the contradiction was a flaw, but it was a passage. You thought you had to choose one side, but your soul was asking you to become both. You thought you had to fix yourself, but your task was to become yourself. Messy, mysterious, unfinished, divine. And now, there is nothing left to prove. Only a life left to live, deeply, honestly, contradictorily. Just like the ones who came before you. Dostoevsky, Rumi, Jung, Buddha, all mad, all torn, all free. And maybe now you're one of them, not coherent, not perfect, but whole.